Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. California has always been a pretty interesting place for politics, but perhaps none more so than in 2021, when we had a recall in the midst of a pandemic. One person that can bring a unique perspective to all of this is Dan Walters, who's been covering news for 61 years in the state capitol for 46 years, almost half a century. That's a long time, Dan.
It is a long time. It just reminds me how ancient I truly am.
It gives our audience a great perspective of what's going on in 2021 and what's going to happen in 2022. So let me ask you, it's been quite a year for the governor. He faced down a recall effort that cost over $250 million. Ended up at the same result that we had back in 2018 when he was first elected. So I think those who were trying to remove him were hoping to either remove him or weaken him politically. But did it have the opposite effect?
I don't know that it really strengthened him. It certainly didn't weaken him. He came through this thing. The amazing thing is just how little things changed from that 2018 when he was elected. His margin of win in the recall was virtually identical to how the margin he had in 2018 when he defeated John Cox to win the governorship. So really nothing changed. Now, that said, earlier in the game this year, along about June and July, the governor's people were really worried that he might lose this thing. The polls didn't look good. There was a lot of lethargy among Democratic voters. Republicans were energized to turn out, and they were, I don't know, panic is exactly the right word, but there was a great deal of concern in the governor's office and his political organization that, they could lose this thing. And they kind of shifted into a new gear to get the Democrats to turn out. And once they got that turnout going, the result was a kind of a foregone conclusion at that point.
Right, because Democratic registration is so high in California. Let me ask you this. So what can the governor claim were his greatest accomplishments in 2021? And what would his critics say were his biggest failures?
Well, his biggest accomplishment, of course, is staying in office. That's the job one for any politician, is to stay in office. And I guess he would probably put his handling of the pandemic and the strange circumstances under which the state had a huge surplus in the budget and how they handled that would be his proudest achievements. The other side would probably say his handling of the pandemic was probably his worst failing. So there's a lot of polarization over that. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think he did some things right and some things not so right. I don't know how history will treat his handling of the pandemic. I think he maybe have relished being a one-man czar by emergency declaration. He relished that maybe a little bit too much. It came through in his long monologues earlier in the year.
Well, in some of the ways, though, it's almost like a hot potato. No other politician wants to touch it, right? So they deferred, let the governor take the heat.
Yeah, the legislature was quite willing to let the governor be a one-man game. But it kind of started grating on people after a while because some of the decrees from the state were frankly difficult to divine, and from terms of equity. Why would you let big department stores stay open while the small local businesses had to shut down? That sort of stuff. And that was, of course, the genesis of the recall, that a lot of people were just angered by what they saw as kind of high-handed, inequitable dealing with the pandemic.
Yeah, that really fueled it. What do you think is going to be the top of his agenda, the governor's agenda in 2022?
Well, basically the same as 2021, get himself reelected. That's the first job right there.
So does that mean that nothing's going to happen? The only focus is going to get his reelection?
I think you'd have to bet, overwhelmingly that he's going to be reelected unless he does something particularly stupid. He's done some stupid things, the famous trip to French Laundry in Napa, for example. But if he doesn't do something really serious,
By the way, that was one expensive dinner
very
in more ways than one.
cost $250 million, basically.
Exactly.
By the way, the reporter who broke that story, Alexei Koseff, is leaving the Chronicle and going to work for my organization, Calmatters. So,
by the way, he's a young reporter, really outstanding. He started at the Sacramento Bee, and then he went to San Francisco Chronicle. Now he's joining Calmatters, an excellent reporter.
yeah, we were colleagues at the Bee, and he and I had a particularly intimate relationship because for a while I was doing daily video commentaries, and he was the only other person on the staff that knew how to operate the video machinery. So we had a daily date. Alexei, he's a great reporter and a great addition to the Calmatters. No, and I think the governor's other major goal is to handle another big budget surplus in such a way that it doesn't backfire in the long run. And this is going to be a tricky business. When you have a lot of money to spend, sometimes the politics of plenty are just as difficult as the politics of poverty.
That's very true. And up next, we're going to talk about that. What are the California legislature going to do with the budget surplus, but also what they do in 2021? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Dan Walters with Calmatters. I'm going to turn our attention now to the California legislature. So Dan, if you were looking at what the California legislature did in the last year, what were the 2 or 3 biggest bills that were passed?
Oh, well, the budget, of course, is always the biggest thing. This is a huge budget. I mean, the state was rolling in money, and they parceled it out in ways that had never been parceled out before, like direct payments to a lot of people. I think more than half of Californians receiving some sort of a check from the state, not for huge amounts of money, but some sort of a tax rebate. And that's caused because there was so much money in the state coffers, thanks to big stock gains in the stock market by rich people, basically, right, that they ran into the GAN limit. And the GAN limit said you have to give some of the money back. So they gave it back in the sense of direct grants to a lot of people. Well, they're probably going to do that again because the state budget is so big. It's probably going to run into the GAN limit again, and they're going to have to do something like that again in 2021. So the legislature was happy to do these things. The legislature is a very liberal group, and anytime they can give out money to poor people, they're going to be wanting to do it. And that'll be the biggest chore for 2022.
Well, let me ask you about housing. Housing was a really big issue and it's still a big issue in 2021. It will be in 2022. They passed some laws, Senate Bill 9, Senate Bill 10, as a way to kind of have the state kind of take some control over the housing issue. Those are 2 pretty big bills.
I would agree with you. That was my second thing. There was the housing bills, SB 9 and SB 10, very controversial, particularly among local governments. So controversial, in fact, that a lot
By
of
the way, we should probably
try to overturn them at the ballot.
We should probably tell our audience, just to let them know, they probably don't know SB 9 and SB 10 specifically.
SB 9 and SB 10 basically make it easier to build multi-family housing in single-family zoned land. And it's seen as a way of jumpstarting housing production in California that's very, very low because it basically reduces the costs of construction. Very controversial. City governments hate it because they're losing their very much cherished land use control. And there's probably going to be a big battle at the ballot in 2022 over those measures. Indirectly, a pending ballot measure would basically say the state can't do the sort of thing they did SB 9 and SB 10. Put it in the Constitution. So that's going to be a big thing in 2022.
It's not clear whether this is actually going to have an effect, but I was looking at some research and it found that the PPIC noted that 67% of all state residences are in single family homes and 75% of developable land is on single family lots. And so, that's what they're attacking there.
Of course, the state wants these cities to rezone land for higher density housing and is putting on a lot of pressure to do that. They have quotas that they're supposed to. This housing thing is like a labyrinth of law and politics, and it's very difficult. We have the highest rents in the nation. We have the second lowest home ownership rate in the nation. It's just a crazy.
Well, the last statistic I saw was that the average price of a California home was $798,000.
Yeah, that's the median, and
that buys you a lot of house in the Midwest.
At last count, that was second only to Hawaii in terms of housing costs, which means as housing prices go up, of course, what that does is price more people out of the market, which is why we have the second lowest rate of home ownership in the country behind New York.
Well, it's also driving the poverty level, right? Because housing is such a big cost in California. That's really driving the poverty rates in California.
It is the major reason why California has the highest poverty rate as calculated by the Census Bureau. And if you add to the people in near poverty, according to Public Policy Institute of California, you're talking about around 35% of all Californians are either in poverty or near poverty.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what do you think is going to be on the legislative agenda for 2022? We've only got about a minute left in this segment.
Well, the budget will be the biggie. And not on the legislative agenda, but certainly on the political agenda, is figuring out the new lines for all the new legislative districts and who's going to run for what and how many people are going to drop out. And there's a big shuffle going to go on, as we always get after redistricting, but more so now because there's an interaction of term limits coming in that's forcing a lot of the legislators out of office very soon.
Yeah, you don't think about that, right? The term limits also have an impact. People have to remember that also plays a role here. But do you think they're going to be, they got the drought to deal with, they got wildfires to deal with, they've got
no shortage
of issues. So
drought will be big, no question about it. Drought will be huge. I mean, there's nothing you can do in an immediate sense about the drought, but the issue of water supply, like housing, is one of those things that's existential issues that are facing California.
Yeah, for sure. Well, up next, we're going to take a look at what happened in Washington, D.C. and how it impacted Californians in 2021 and what federal actions in 2022 might be affecting Californians next year. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're speaking with longtime political observer Dan Walters with Calmatters. I'm going to turn our attention to the federal government's actions in 2021 and how it may have impacted Californians. You know, the biggest political story seemed to be coming out of Washington, D.C. was the infrastructure bill. And I'm just wondering, what do you think the infrastructure bill will mean for California in 2022?
Well, if you actually do run the numbers, you find out that California didn't get very much out of that infrastructure bill. On a per capita basis, we're right down there to the bottom of the state.
But isn't that the normal way? California doesn't do as well as other states?
Well, you know, it's the ABC, anybody but California problem that's always plagued the state. And, you know, the idea, well, California's got a lot of money. We don't have to give them any more. But so, yeah, we got some money. We got, as I recall, $40–50 billion or something like that. And a lot of it's going to go into the highway system. Which is in a way ironic because the state's trying to get people to stop driving, but nevertheless, that's where the money's going to go because that's where it has to go. And it's going to have some impact, but in comparison to the size of the state and the size of the state's road network and the condition of that road network, which is very, very poor relative to other states, it's not going to have a huge kind of wow factor. It's going to just add a little bit to the game. And it's over the next 5 years. It's not going to be immediate either. So, yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's money's money, and better get it if you can get it, I suppose. But it's not what you call in national terms, they're talking about it being a game changer. This is not going to be a game changer for California.
Well, it may be because California's Democrats don't have to worry about California. They do have to worry about other states. And so they want to put up those signs in other states that say, you know, coming soon.
Yeah.
I mean, California, I saw something that they're anticipating about $30 billion a year coming to the state, $25 billion over 5 years for repairing roads, $4.2 billion over 5 years for bridges. So a lot of this money is going toward roads and bridges, but maybe the reason is they're giving it to other states because politically that makes some sense probably. Let me ask you this. In 2022, US Senator Alex Padilla is up for election. He was appointed to the post by the governor. Who are the Republicans likely to put up as an opponent? Do they have any chance, or is this just fait accompli?
This is a fait accompli. There's no chance at all that Alex Padilla, once again, with the old caveat, if you don't do something really, really stupid, yes, he'll sail into re-election without any question of all. The big question in everybody's mind is the other Senate seat, that of Dianne Feinstein, whether she's up in 2024, but if the Republicans retake control of the Senate, given state of her health and age and state of her husband's health, there's a pretty good bet that she's not going to run for re-election. So we're going to start seeing the real shuffle. The people who might otherwise want to run for Alex Padilla's seat will be all lining up to try to run for Dianne Feinstein's seat in 2024. And that may include the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. I mean, if he wants to continue his political career, it's probably his best move.
Yeah, it's going to be a political free-for-all, I think, when that seat opens up. When the seat opens up, that usually is the case, even more so in California with that seat. Let me ask you this. U.S. Supreme Court, a lot of decisions that impact the entire country, but there are some decisions that specifically impact California. Are there any cases that you're looking at in 2022 that are going to directly impact Californians?
Absolutely. I'm not sure it's going to make it up there by 2022, but the California's very, very restrictive gun control laws are going to be in the court. Everybody's waiting for the court to decide a case out of New York. And if in fact they take a very strong right to bear arms position in that case, you can expect them to take up cases from California, several of which are pending, one of which just went through the 9th District Court of Appeal having to do with the capacity of magazines. That will have a big, maybe it's more psychological impact than anything else. Probably the Roe v. Wade decision, if it comes down that restricting abortion rights, it won't have a direct effect on California, but it will have kind of an indirect effect of making California one of the places where you can go to get an abortion legally. That could have an effect. I think those are the things that just pop into my head immediately would be guns and abortion. I mean, are there any two more polarizing issues than those? And they're probably going to be at the Supreme Court, and we'll feel the impact of those.
Yeah, there's no question. The only difference is there's a difference between a 5-4 majority and a 6-3 majority. And the 5-4 majority, you have to have some compromise, and you're taking baby steps in terms of changing the law. When it's a 6-3 majority, you don't have to take baby steps. You can take some pretty significant steps. And so some people are thinking that this conservative Supreme Court, which a lot of people are comparing to the court back in the 1930s, is going to take some significant steps in public policy issues. I guess we'll see on that. Up next, what are going to be the big political stories in 2022? We're going to ask Dan to take a peek at his crystal ball and let us know what he thinks is going to be happening in 2022. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with longtime Capitol observer Dan Walters of Calmatters about what's been happening in 2021 and what's likely to happen in 2022. So I'm going to ask you, Dan, to take out your crystal ball and give us your projections for 2022. There's a lot of frustrations Californians and everyone has had over COVID. I'm wondering, is there going to be a spillover effect politically of COVID in 2022 politically?
I think there could be an effect but it's a lot of ifs in that. If this latest mutation of the virus turns in to be more difficult than it appears to be initially in terms of infection rates and whatnot, and the governor clamps down on economic activity and schools and everything else again, as he did in the past, I think there could be a political reaction. And people are kind of weary of this whole thing, obviously. and very sensitive about, on and off. The restrictions go on, they come off, they go on, they come off. We went through this for almost 2 years now. And I think if they went back on again, there would be a political reaction of some kind. You would drive a lot of people out of business, probably. There's a lot of small businesses that are marginal to begin with. And it could have a political effect. But I think barring that, I think the governor will win re-election. The Senator Padilla will win re-election. The biggest interests, I think, are in the legislative seats and the congressional seats, which are now undergoing the redistricting process. And nobody's going to know what those districts look like until December 27th, because the redistricting commission is changing everything every day.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people, a lot of candidates out there waiting to find out what districts they can run in. We're going to have Democrat incumbents thrown into districts together, particularly at the congressional level, because remember, we're losing a congressional seat for the first time in our history. And there's going to be a big shuffle going on. Now, in the end, what's going to be? The Democrats will still control their legislature by overwhelming majorities. There'll probably be a lot of new faces in the legislature, but they're going to be mostly Democrats. And the Democrats will control the congressional delegation overwhelmingly. But it's possible that the Democrats might lose a seat or two in the congressional delegation because of having to change the districts to account for a loss of one California seat. And again, we're going to have some new faces in all those things. And we're going to have those who survive probably start thinking about running for Dianne Feinstein's Senate seat in 2024. Now, the main thing, however, is on November, we're going to get another big load of ballot measures.
Before you get to, I do want to ask you that question, but just let me kind of follow up on your point here about redistricting. PPIC did a study and they found that, well, first of all, you need 2/3 supermajorities. So the magical number in the assembly is 54. The magical number in the Senate is 27. Okay. Right now, they have 59 seats in the assembly. They need 54. They have 59 for supermajority. PPIC projects that they'll go to 62 with the districts they're talking about now. In terms of the Senate, they have 31 seats. They need a 27 for a supermajority. PPIC expects that number is going to stay the same. So their analysis basically is, Republicans, the best chance they have is to try to overcome that supermajority, but the chance of them actually taking over the Assembly or Senate, that ain't going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. The Republicans' best hope for gains in next year's elections are going to be in congressional seats.
Right.
The possibility they might pick up one or two. Remember, they lost half of their seats in 2018, gained back about half of what they lost in 2020, and they could get back a couple of more of those seats.
That's exactly the PPIC's analysis. They've got 42 of the 53 seats right now. The Democrats do. PPIC says if they redo the districts the way they're talking, it could drop to 40. So from 42 to 40 for congressional districts. We've got about a minute and a half left in the segment. I did want to get to the propositions that you were bringing up. Right now, there's potential for 40 propositions on the ballot. Okay, it's not going to happen, 40, but there could be a lot. What are some of the big ones?
We could see 4 different measures on sports wagering, for example. We have a major ballot measure having to do with medical malpractice stuff. We have the cities a lot of the cities putting out a ballot measure that would overturn some of these housing laws that the legislature's passed most recently. There's going to be some really meaty stuff on the ballot, some old wine in new bottles, like a ballot measure that's been beaten twice over the dialysis clinic staffing. But yeah, there's a lot of activity on the ballot measure front going on right now. No, we're not going to get 40, but I would not be surprised to see a dozen or so probably major issues on the ballot.
Yeah, I think the high water mark was like 17 or so a couple of years ago, but it's going to be a very interesting November with lots of things on the ballot for sure. I want to thank our guest, the ever insightful Dan Walters with Calmatters, bringing all his years of experience to our audience. Really appreciate you spending the time, Dan.
All right.
This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. And if you want to stay current with local and state politics, you can log on to the Maddy Institute website at maddyinstitute.org. Thanks for joining us. If you want to stay up to date on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.